Hi, everybody. Haven't seen you guys in a while. My name's Kathy Focht. I'm the chair of the Iowa County Democrats, as well as a member of the Heart of Iowa team. Thanks for joining us this evening. We're sharing the hosting duties tonight with the Iowa Women's Caucus, and Mary Weaver, the chair of the Iowa Women's Caucus, is also here. As you know, our topic this evening is why Iowa's cancer rates are so high now. This has been in the Iowa press lately, as well as the national press, and I think we all want some input on what's going on and maybe some talking points that we can take out in our communities, as well as is there any way we can help other than the obvious way of calling our representatives and senators. Before we start tonight, just a few housekeeping items. We're recording tonight and it's not live streamed. We can't do that tonight. But we will be recording it and it will be on Heart of Iowa Facebook page and Heart of Iowa YouTube, as well as the Women's Caucus Facebook page, probably by tomorrow. And I will also send out an email to all of you with the links for those and any, things that come up tonight that you need a link to out of the chat room. You can also view a transcript tonight of this by selecting live transcription on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. I'm sure you've all done this before. If you have a question this evening, drop it in the chat room. Just click the chat button on the toolbar, type in your question. We're going to start with the questions that were submitted in advance, and then we'll get to as many of the chat room questions as possible. Sometimes they overlap, so it's one topic and we can get them kind of answered in one fell swoop. Also, feel free to drop in the chat room suggestions for speakers, topics, anything for future Heart of Iowa or Women's Caucus events. We'd love to hear from you. I'm going to drop, when I quit talking, I'm going to drop the Heart of Iowa Democrats email address in the chat room. And I'm going to ask Mary to do the same thing for the Women's Caucus in case you want to know, get in touch with us about anything. We're really pleased to have 3 guests this evening. When I sent out the initial email, I didn't know about the third one. But we also have a representative joining us tonight, and I'm going to pass this off. They're going to introduce themselves tonight, and Kelly Sittig from the Iowa Cancer Consortium will be moderating the call. So I'm going to hand it off to you, Kelly.
Thanks, Kathy. And thank you, everybody, for the invitation to come and moderate this really great discussion. My name is Kelly Wells Sittig. I have the pleasure of serving as the executive director of an organization called the Iowa Cancer Consortium. And I'm also especially lucky to get to work with the 2 speakers tonight through that organization, Dr. Sean Ellerbrook and Representative Austin Baith, who are both consortium members and great cancer control partners. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I'm going to tell you just very briefly about the Iowa Cancer Consortium, and then I will pass it over to Dr. Ellerbrook to give a brief introduction of himself and some background. And then we think Representative Baith will be on to do the same thing, and then we will start some Q&A. We know that Representative Baith has some limited time with us here tonight, so we'll probably start with him for questions. I want to note that we are all here likely because we have been touched by cancer in some way, and probably many of you have heard, as Kathy mentioned earlier, that we have incredibly high cancer incidence rates here in Iowa. In fact, we're second in the country. We're one of only 2 states where incidence rates are rising, and we have the fastest rising cancer incidence rate in the country, which I think probably like me, you are all very concerned about. So I'm looking forward to talking through with our experts tonight and hearing your questions as well. I do want to tell you about the Iowa Cancer Consortium, though, a little bit, because I hope that some of you will find a place to engage there as well. The Iowa Cancer Consortium is a nonprofit coalition, statewide coalition of people who are working in cancer control, interested in cancer control, working in advocacy or acting as an advocate for cancer control here in the state of Iowa. We have about 700 members right now across the state. Our members are come from all different backgrounds, experiences, professions, geographic locations within the state. It's very varied, which I think is what makes us very strong. We know that cancer is a really complex disease, and addressing it would be almost impossible to do alone. We need all of us working together, including researchers like Dr. Ellerbrook and policymakers like Representative Baith, in order to try and turn around our very high cancer incidence rates. There's a place for everyone at the Iowa Cancer Consortium, and I am actually going to drop a link in the chat here so you can check it out if you are interested in learning more. Do that very quickly. Our role really is to connect people with each other who are interested in collaborating in cancer control or advocacy, especially, which I think would be of interest to this group. We help folks find resources, whether that's human resources, partnerships, funding, education, information, connection to experts, so that cancer control can be, again, done bigger and better and more collaboratively. We have several statewide work groups where folks can connect virtually around different cancer control topics that you can connect on. Of special interest to this group might be our policy work group, which meets every month, or I'm sorry, once a month during the Iowa legislative session. On Friday, actually, is our next meeting, and I could give you more information about that if you are interested. It's a great way to get in contact with and connection with lots of different cancer advocacy groups and stay up to date on what's happening that could touch cancer at the State House. I'm also going to drop a link in the chat here in just a little bit for something called the Iowa Cancer Plan, which the consortium puts together. That is a document that's meant to be a strategic backed plan for the entire state. Anyone working in cancer control, whether a healthcare provider, a researcher, a policymaker, should be able to pick up the Iowa Cancer Plan and have some identified priorities, strategies, and action steps for reducing the burden of cancer in our state. So I will put that in the chat here in just a second also. And then the last thing I want to share with you is I know probably most of you align very clearly with a political party. I do want to mention that at the Iowa Cancer Consortium, we are nonpartisan, non-political, and we are partly state funded. So we don't do any sort of lobbying. So I always have to say at the very beginning of things like this that any discussion that happens tonight around specific bills or bills that I share with you are not necessarily supported or meant to be, that's not meant to be taken as support or opposition to any bills from the Iowa Cancer Consortium. We are here to share information and make sure that Iowans have the information they need to participate in the important processes that are going to help reduce the burden of cancer. So thank you for letting me make that disclaimer. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Dr. Ellerbrook. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat and I'll make sure we get to them during Q&A time. Dr. Ellerbrook.
Thank you, Kelly. As was mentioned, I'm Dr. Ellerbrook. As a bit of a background, I'm an Iowa guy, graduated from Sioux City, Heelan, got my undergrad degree at the University of Iowa, and my doctorate in cancer research from Northwestern University. From there, I was at went out to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, worked at the Lineberger Cancer Center, where I was funded by the American Cancer Society to be a postdoc, and I did research for about 4 years in the Jimmy Valvano lab out there in Carolina. So I felt like I was in the most beautiful place in the world to get some good work done. And then I came back to Iowa here to teach. I'm always thought of being a professor was a cool gig. Turned out it was. So I teach biochemistry and still do research and publish. And for the last 30 years, I've been studying ovarian cancer, especially the enzymes that are involved with its metastasis. So with that said, I see that Representative Baith has joined us. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a background on cancer so that we're all on the same page about this conversation that we're going to have, and then I'll kick it over to Austin so you can answer your questions as it relates to maybe some legislative pieces. So, it's going to sound like I'm getting ready to tell you a long thing here, but Just stick with me, all right? I want everyone to be clear about something. We're made up of about, trillions of cells in our body with lots of unique functions. And some cells, such as skin, hair, and blood, well, heck, they divide about every day. Other cells, such as neurons and pancreatic cells, much more slowly, if at all. So, why that is has been a study for a number of decades. But what's really important for you to remember is we all came from a fertilized egg, which means in our background, every cell in our background has the ability or the potential to divide really fast. But the great news is we got protectors in our cells, proteins, RNA, and immune system block cells from dividing faster than they should or die if they become damaged. The unfortunate thing, everybody, is that through genetic mutation, these protectors can become less effective. Now, this can allow a cell to divide when it should not and produce a tumor. Now, we've seen these benign tumors in clinic. Skin tags, moles, lipomas, polyps, fibroids, it goes on. But in these cases, these cells have not, outgrown their confines. They can be removed fairly easily or just watched, as they are usually not a problem. But if these tumors acquire more genetic mutations, those protectors I mentioned earlier, they become even more damaged. And this can lead to faster and faster growth of the tumor cells. And, eventually they can even escape their margins and move to other tissues. And we call that a malignant cancer of some grade. So this is why early detection is important. The earlier you screen and identify, the more likely you can catch a benign tumor before it turns malignant. Colorectal, breast, lung, prostate, they're all important early screening targets that you should focus on in your health. So you're here because you heard Iowa has a cancer problem. Well, we do. And many people are rightly asking what is causing our high cancer rate. More specifically, you're asking what carcinogens Iowans are being uniquely exposed to drive that rate. Now, carcinogens can be mutagens, meaning it mutates DNA. When such mutations happen in a cell can damage our protectors, the ones I mentioned earlier, their ability to block cell division and promoting cell death. Some of you have certain types of cancer in your family. Here you inherit mutations. DNA, effectively giving you a head start to the number of mutations needed to form a tumor. Now, carcinogens can be promoters too, besides mutagens. And here they just basically talk to cells and say divide when they should not. Carcinogens can also impair our immune system, which we count on to protect us from our own cells that have overstepped their bounds. So when you see something labeled as a carcinogen, it could be for fact it's a mutagen, a promoter, or maybe immunosuppressant. The list is longer, but the idea is it doesn't just have to damage DNA. So back to the question at hand, what carcinogens are causing Iowa's cancer rate and why is it so high? Well, I'm just going to read you a short list of carcinogens that we are focusing on here. Tobacco, alcohol, UV light, radon, asbestos, nitrates, agrochemicals, PFAS, also known as forever chemicals, viruses, and metals. There's a lot of things in this world that want to make us bleed. So with that, Austin, floor is yours.
What an uplifting segue. Thank you, Dr.
Well,
Ellenbrook.
it is cancer for the conversation, Austin.
Thank you, Dr. Ellenbrook, for that excellent primer in kind of the basic science of cancer and background on me. I'm an internal medicine doctor, and I also practice palliative care. So I unfortunately see the ravages of cancer on the clinic side, and now seeing the way that the cross section with the policy side. I'm in my second term in the state legislature, and have been trying my best to get my colleagues in the legislature to start to put this at the top of their priorities when we're thinking about state policies. And I'm a Democrat, so as some of you may be aware, that Democrats don't have a whole lot of power in determining what those legislative priorities are right now in the Capitol, but I've been doing my best to improve the awareness among Iowans so that they call their own representatives and senators and tell them, hey, start talking about this, start doing something. Also, because I'm a Democrat, it's not very easy to get a bill with my name on it across the governor's desk or to even have a consideration in a committee meeting. So thankfully, I've found other partners across the aisle who also care a lot about fighting cancer in Iowa and have partnered with them in writing bills. And am happy to report that we've actually had a lot of success this year in getting some legislation through the process. We'll see if it makes it all the way to the governor's desk. There's 7 different steps it takes for a bill to become law in the state of Iowa, and we have some bills right now that have passed at least 2 or 3 of those steps. So I'm happy, and maybe we'll get into this more in the question and answer section, but in general, kind of the 2 main baskets of bills that I've been trying to champion are, one, as Dr. Ellerbrook discussed, go after a lot of the known risk factors for cancer that we need to better mitigate through state policy. And that includes smoking, radon, obesity, alcohol, UV exposure. And then the other basket is trying to figure out what's left to explain the magnitude of our excess cancer rates. Most of us in cancer science aren't really convinced that the entirety of Iowa's cancer crisis can be explained by the usual suspects of cancer: smoking, obesity, alcohol, as I mentioned. What else is there? And because Iowa does not, we're number 2 in the nation. Number 1 in the nation in cancer is Kentucky. Why? Because they smoke a lot. Iowa does not have an obvious reason for why we're number 2. And so that gets to basket number 2, is trying to invest state resources into that research to figure out what are the other drivers to our excess cancer rates. And I've been working with mostly Republicans to try to get them to sign on to this, and was really happy to see the governor commit to spending $1 million in cancer epidemiology in partnership with the University of Iowa. So that is something that I am really encouraging her on and thankful for. And I'm happy to get into the weeds of what other specific bills are going forward. I'll tell you that we are not going to turn this ship around overnight, both in a legislative sense. It can take years to have significant policies get across the finish line, and also in the cancer control sense. It takes years to sometimes get adequate research and more time to mitigate those risk factors, but there's no time like the present to put some real effort behind it.
Thank you, Representative Bates. And I'm really glad that you are talking about this as a long game, because as you say, we recognize that it can take a long time for policy to go through and be successful. We also have to remember that cancer itself takes a long time to develop. So I wish I had this graph to show, but if we look at when our rates started to turn around here in Iowa, it was years ago, and likely whatever mix of factors came together to make those rates change. Likely that was decades, that happened decades before that time even. And so I think it's really important that we remember the complexity that we're really dealing with. It feels so urgent right now, and it is, because this is people are dying, people are living lower quality of lives because of cancer, and we do have to act as swiftly as we can. We also have a long ways to go, and it probably will be a long-term investment and a long game in order to turn things around. So thank you for talking about it that way. We had a lot of questions submitted beforehand about radon, and a lot of the bills that I know you've been working on relate to radon. I'm going to see here, let's see, how big of a factor in Iowa is radon? And I know Sean and I can probably help with some of the data, though you probably know it too. How big of a factor is radon, and does more need to be done to mitigate radon in Iowa? And maybe you can talk very briefly about some of the bills you've proposed around.
Sure. It's the American Lung Association estimates that radon is responsible for about 400 deaths in Iowa per year, and that would be primarily through lung cancer. Radon disproportionately affects smokers. It seems to have a multiplying effect on the carcinogenicity of radon is in smokers' lungs, but it's also the number one cause of lung cancer in non-smokers. So radon's a big issue, and especially in Iowa. Iowa is one of only 2 states in the country in which every single county is designated as zone 1 by the EPA, meaning highest risk for radon levels. So only Iowa and North Dakota have the entire state blanketed by high radon levels. And such to the fact that it's estimated that 70% of Iowa homes have an elevated radon level. 70%. Yet only 1 in 15 homes have been checked for radon in the last decade. And by the way, if you're looking around and think, oh man, that might be me. In fact, I just got my dad to check his radon level. It was elevated. You can order a cheap kind of starter test to test for radon. I've often used Alpha Energy Labs. That's aelabs.com, I believe, Alpha Energy Labs. And there's other radon labs out there to get tested. So that's certainly what I have kind of latched onto as low-hanging fruit from a legislative standpoint of things that we can do from a policy stance where we don't have to go up against big tobacco or big ag or some of these other powerful special interest groups who might block meaningful legislation to help mitigate this risk factor. So some of the policies that we've proposed, one is to offer free radon testing for Iowans. This is actually something that North Dakota does. And so this is something that is making its way through the legislative process. It's been successful so far, where we would commit $20,000 per year for radon testing for Iowans, and that comes out to right now estimated over 1,600 tests per year. There's another bill that actually had no part of, but another Republican colleague proposed a tax refund, a tax credit for people who do radon mitigation in their homes. Radon mitigation can cost up to $2,000 if you're doing radon mitigation after the fact. That's called active radon mitigation. We've proposed a bill to build in passive radon mitigation in new home construction. So it's much cheaper, between $200 and $500, usually around $300, where as you build the home, you can make it radon resistant. So since radon is so prevalent in our soil, we thought we might as well start radon proofing, or at least protecting our new housing stock as it's being built. There's another bill that would help renters, since nearly half of Iowans rent homes. If a renter were to find an elevated radon level in their unit, and just a second, buddy. Sorry, I'm also watching kids right now. And if their landlord doesn't mitigate that radon, the renter would be allowed out of their lease without any sort of financial penalty. So those are just kind of a start of some of the bills that we're approaching through radon. There's certainly more that we could and should do, but this is at least a start in the right direction, in my opinion.
Thanks, Austin. How are you doing on time?
There's been no bloodshed that I can
All
see
right.
from here, so we're still good.
A good sign. Okay. Somebody asked ahead of time too, what can individuals do to be proactive about cancer in Iowa? And this is something, I think there's like two answers to this, right? Like there is a lot we can do individually to reduce our risk of cancer, and we can talk about that. But we also talk about, the important role that policy plays in having bigger impact. So beyond the individual, at the community, the state level, the national level. Um, do you have advice for folks who, or an ask or anything like that for folks who want to get involved at the policy level to make a difference in cancer?
Absolutely. So um, I presume all of you know how to, just because of the nature of the groups involved here, know how to get a hold of your representatives at the Capitol. But it's really, really, the thing is there's thousands of issues that lawmakers are requested to address every single year. Thousands of issues. And yet only a handful of bills are ever really sent all the way to the governor's desk each year. And the bills that do are the ones where the volume is turned up loud enough from constituents or special interest groups, but the better ones are from constituents who say, you got to prioritize this number one. And so one of the most effective ways to do that is to either call or send a personalized email, not a canned message, but a personalized email, even 4 sentences saying, please take cancer prevention as your top priority. Um, and Kelly, I think you could probably be helpful by listing some of the bill numbers, because it is helpful to have that specific ask of them, is will you please support House File 63 and so forth. Because the more that we can turn the volume up on this, the more we're going to increase the chances that we get this across the finish line.
Thank you for that. And I've got two more.
Yeah.
I'm going to say quick because we also have a lot to hear from Dr. Ellerbrook, but I want to make sure we get to these two. Somebody asked, does the state of Iowa spend any money on research to investigate why Iowa has such high cancer rates? If yes, how much, please? And where should the state of Iowa spend more money? And you kind of referenced the governor's commitment, but anything more to add to that one?
I'm going to be brutally honest right now. Up so far, other than the state of Iowa's continued commitment to the Iowa Cancer Consortium, and also funding or helping to fund the Iowa Cancer Registry, who is monitoring our cancer rate. There otherwise has not been a specific investment from the state of Iowa, to my knowledge, of investigating why our cancer rates are so high to date. Now, as we discussed, the governor has now proposed spending $1 million in coordination with the University of Iowa to study this. And so, better late than never. And I'm very happy for it. I was, however, pretty upset a year and a half ago when I was talking to the Iowa Department of Public Health, asking what are they doing to figure out why our cancer rate's so high. Because once again, this is, by the way, the third year in a row it's been announced we've had the second highest cancer rate in the country. And even then it was crickets when I was waiting for a response of what was being done to investigate this. So better late than never. I'm really happy and thankful for it. All of us could always propose that we spend even more money to investigate this. Luckily, cancer epidemiology research is on the cheaper end of forms of medical research. It's not like running a randomized placebo-controlled clinical trial, but the more money brings more researchers time into looking into this data.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that. And I can also add that the University of Iowa, the Cancer Center, and the College of Public Health are convening a group of experts from outside of the state in different topics that may, we want to be looking at. And that group will hopefully have a recommendation for state partners about where to start looking. I mean, we know a lot about where to start looking, but having that added expertise will be great too. And then the last thing I want to ask you about, Austin, is we know the clear tie to radon and cancer. You have the tanning bill. Sometimes legislation doesn't necessarily directly mention cancer, but could have a big impact on cancer and cancer control. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the vaccine bill that's happening, and then also the Medicaid work and community engagement requirements.
Oh boy, yeah. So there's actually various vaccine bills. There's actually a lot of anti-vax rooted legislation out there, including directly related to cancer, bills that would make it harder for adolescents to receive the HPV vaccine. Right now, 16, 17-year-old can get the HPV vaccine from their pediatrician without parental consent, and there are bills working their way through that would now require that. And states that have done that have seen lower HPV vaccination rates, which leads to higher cancer rates. HPV is responsible for 5 or 6 different types of cancer, depending on how you categorize it. And then most recently, which has reached the headlines, are related to vaccines, are bills that would make it harder to get the COVID vaccine. One bill would basically criminalize the administration of the COVID vaccine, a misdemeanor charged with $500. That bill is probably dead. We don't know till after Friday. And then another bill that would essentially scare vaccine manufacturers, hospitals, and clinics from administering the COVID vaccine due to a legal liability law. I am hoping that these bills don't make it through. I don't think there's enough support for it in even the Republican caucus, I'm hoping. But certainly for patients who have cancer and have weakened immune systems, a COVID vaccine is oftentimes life-saving. And so this would be a horrible step in the wrong direction for improving the health of Iowans. As to Medicaid, there was a bill. I was in the health committee today that basically passed a bill that would incorporate work requirements to receive Medicaid in the state of Iowa. This is something we're probably going to see across the country with the Trump administration now at the helm. And if this passes, we're going to see the same thing that happened in Arkansas when they passed a similar bill in which thousands of Iowans lose their Medicaid coverage. And we know that being insured is very important for the detection of cancer. In fact, there's direct evidence that with Medicaid expansion going the other way, we saw Medicaid recipients in those states who expanded Medicaid have cancer detected at an earlier rate, therefore at a curable stage, and it saved a lot of lives. This bill would go the opposite direction.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Please thank your kids for us for letting us have your time.
It's silent now, so I'm actually a little bit worried.
I was going to say that's not good. Not a good sign. Good luck. Godspeed.
Hey, thank you all. Kelly, by the way, nice job on the radio today. Iowa Public NPR, actually.
Yes, sir.
National radio. We have a famous person in our midst. Thank you all for being on this call. Thank you for your interest in this. And we will turn things around both in the cancer front, and you can plug your ears, Kelly, also on the political side too, because Democrats are on the way back. Hang in there.
I like it,
Thanks everybody for being part of this.
Thanks, Austin. All right, Dr. Ellerbrook, are you ready for the hot seat?
Yeah, I'm ready for the hot seat. You know, and that gene therapy or the gene based vaccine bill is even worse than what described, because you look at gene-based vaccines, that's not just COVID. I mean, we're stretching to a number of well-known vaccines that could be impacted. So the way that bill is written, it's not good. And you know, if this is funnel week, so if it doesn't pass through a committee, it dies. But we all know that nothing really dies on the in the legislature, because it could come back as an amendment. And you know, it's just the fact that it's even brought up is problematic. But one of the other things I wanted to add on was that his comment about radon and then smoking. You know, that highlights a real problem with epidemiology and trying to tease apart what causes our cancer, because we've got these carcinogens in our environment that can interplay with each other to produce a situation like lung cancer. Yet when you do the analysis of the work of whether or not a particular chemical, for example, might be dangerous to us, it's often you know, examined you know, as an isolated chemical in a animal experiment or whatever. It's not usually done with other factors interplaying. So you can get synergy, or you can get combination impacts that all of a sudden you might say, "Oh, gee, it's safe because you need such a high titer of that chemical to see the impact." But with other things, it doesn't take as much, and it's a really hard answer to find.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I mean, I would say that since we have been talking about Iowa having the second highest cancer incidence rate, um, primarily what we hear is people asking, is it our environment? Is it agricultural exposures? And so I appreciate you bringing up the fact too that just like there are so many chemicals. It's possible to potentially study them independently, though likely not all of them. And it could also be interactions with those chemicals that could be having different effects. It's so complicated. It is so complicated. So thanks for bringing that up. And if we could stick with the environmental thought real quick, we do have questions about water quality.
Sure.
So folks are asking, is our water safe?
Well, we definitely have issues with our water, and when you take a look at some of the news lately as it relates to our water quality. I wonder if how many folks here have been following PFAS, which are per polyfluoroalkyl substances. They're forever chemicals, and I'm going to highlight these initially, and then bring in kind of a larger conversation about our water. Uh, what uh, what we have found with the PFAS lately is that when you treat water, like at a treatment facility for a municipality, you create this byproduct that they more or less call sewer sludge. It's not exactly you know, a great name, but it is fairly descriptive, because it's a mud-like residue that contains, you know, nutrients and, well, unfortunately, heavy metals, pathogens, and lots of PFAS. So why I bring this up is the sewer sludge is being used as a component or itself as a fertilizer. And so we're spreading this on a lot of crops, gardens, golf courses, and bags of compost. And what we're finding is that these forever chemicals are in a great abundance. And the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, recently published it really was a long-awaited risk assessment on PFAS in the sewer sludge, and they found that it was much, much higher than suspected. It could pose a significant health concern to humans. And what you've got there is that you put this stuff on the land, and then it runs off, and then it's a forever chemical. And then you treat water, and it just accumulates and accumulates, and you can imagine this turns into a cycle. Well, we also then have to be concerned about the water that we drink, how much PFAS are in there. So the EPA has about 90 contaminants that they require for facilities to screen and make sure that the contaminant levels don't cross a threshold. Okay. Now, among those 90, there are some PFAS that are now being asked to monitor. Not all of them, but a couple, three really important ones. There was recently, about a year ago, a report in the Iowa Capital Dispatch that at least 12 communities in Iowa had affected drinking waters where there was unacceptable high levels of these forever chemicals. And they need to upgrade their, treatment facilities, which can cost, millions of dollars. And, in order to remove these PFAS from our drinking water to, low enough levels. And so some communities have already started working on that. I know Tama, which is nearby, where some of you are, they were on that list, but they've looked at, doing a better job of cleaning up their waters. But nonetheless, we still have concerns about PFAS in our municipalities. And yes, they are carcinogens, and they also affect us in our health in other ways. So it's going to be a really important question when you say how safe is our drinking water, is whether or not we deal with this, what I think is going to be more and more in the news, PFAS and getting into our water system from things like fertilizers and the sewer sludge based things. Now, when you talk about where else we should be focusing on besides the municipality water, we've got about maybe 250,000 Iowans that drink from well water. And I would say probably maybe 10 to 30% of these wells have elevated bacteria or arsenic or nitrates and PFAS as well. And so we have to be concerned about not just municipal water cleanliness, but also the well waters themselves. So the question is, what can you do to make sure that you're not ingesting nitrates that might cause your, increase colorectal cancer, or PFAS that might be, impacting a lot of hormonal cancers or something like this. What you need to understand is the best filter out there is a reverse osmosis filter. It has tiny pores that block these chemicals from getting through, and so you can effectively remove these PFAS from your water. Now, a standard Brita filter, it's a carbon filter. It does not remove PFAS. It does not remove nitrates. It's not going to work. And so like a carbon-based filter that's in your refrigerator that you might use, depending on the refrigerator and the filter, but probably not going to remove PFAS and nitrates. You need a reverse osmosis system to get this done. So if you're running a well, I would definitely want to invest in that. And if not, just remember these charcoal filter units are there to get chlorine and some other things out to make your water taste better, but they're not exactly going to remove some of the things that we are, concerned about. And if you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to go with, a water bottle, or, something like, well, that those have BPAs, or which is an endocrine disruptor, and some other things. So yeah, it's a problem as it relates to health. So I would, $2,000, $2,500 for radon mitigation. Not everybody has that. Money for a reverse osmosis system to make sure that you're not drinking nitrates and PFAS out of your well or your municipal water. That's a problem. I understand it. It costs money, but that's something that I think if Dr. Bates is still on the screen, he'd say, well, that's what we can help you with through legislation and appropriation.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. I want to note that there's some discussion in the chat of cancer incidence rates, and question of, is it because we have an older state? And thanks to Mary Ellen Miller, who pointed out that the rates that we're hearing about are age adjusted. So they adjust for that possibility. So it is not just that we have an older population. We often hear too, are we just screening for cancer better? We are pretty right in line with the rest of the country for screening too. So just wanted to comment on those couple things from the chat. And then Dr. Ellerbrook, somebody's asking, what do you think about why Iowa's number 2?
Yeah, well, if I were to put a a top list. I think it's a combination of smoking and radon. And I think it's agrochemicals that are getting into. I think we're seeing that some of the pesticides are immunosuppressants probably. I think there's a link with some of the herbicides and fungicides too. So when you start looking at the bigger picture of why Iowa is different, I mean, it's not, other states drink, other states smoke, you know, you got to look at what it makes Iowa unique. And honestly, we've got a lot of chemicals we spread all over our ground that gets into our water. And we have some issues with that. It also gets into our air. We certainly spray a lot, and if anybody's been downwind of some spray, you'll know because you'll smell it. I mean, you have to be real about the situation too, though, is that, you know, uh, chemicals that make money, they're hard to get out of our environment because there's a lot of special interests behind that. So that's my honest opinion.
Yeah, thank you. And for those who might be interested, I popped into the chat a link to the NIH Agricultural Health Study, which is one of the largest studies of agricultural populations. If you're interested in that, they look at cancer, they look at other health risks, really interesting findings there. And then I'm also going to pop in, you mentioned smoking. There is a bill right now that would close the casino loophole in the Smoke Free Air Act. So making sure that folks have information about that. That's in the chat too. Okay. I'm scanning really quickly to make sure I'm not missing any questions.
Well, while you look, there is
Yeah.
another bill that I think folks have been interested in, and we should probably mention this. And that's Senate File 394, which would provide legal potential protection for pesticide manufacturers. And since I just mentioned herbicides, fungicides and pesticides, I think that makes sense to talk about it real quick. So the idea about this bill is that really I think Bayer is a big pusher for it. Bayer makes Roundup. And glyphosate is Roundup, and when you look at glyphosate, there's some discussion on whether it's carcinogenic or not. And whether it's a mutagen or a promoter or what it might be. I will tell you that straight out, some of international cancer groups have said it was, and then including the WHO, and then the EPA says it's not. And since the EPA says that glyphosate is not a cancer-causing agent, the label for Roundup does not have to have that. They have to follow federal law, guidelines, and they do. But nevertheless, when you take a look at what has happened in the past with Roundup and Bayer, they have been successfully sued for billions of dollars as it relates to non-Hodgkin lymphoma and whether or not Roundup caused it. So they have certainly been liable in court, and the claimants have been found justified, and they've had to pay out. I think most recently in 2020. So this is a really big bill for Bayer and Roundup, because if it goes through, what the bill basically says is that as long as Roundup says whatever the EPA requires them to do, which is to say nothing right now about being carcinogenic, then they can't be sued. If they followed their guidelines, they can't be sued. And this is again, and it doesn't matter if another research group says otherwise. It's whatever the EPA says. They claim that this will remove meritus, without merit bills, but honestly, or excuse me, lawsuits. But honestly, it's a problem because the verdict's still out on what Roundup might actually do as far as cancer causing. And what we said earlier is things can combine with each other to drive cancer. So we have to look at the larger picture of that particular pesticide versus all the other things that might be in the environment. So to put a bill in place that wouldn't allow a Iowan to sue for the cancer that they developed seems a bit aggressive and perhaps too corporate favoritism instead of maybe being looking out for Iowans. That's it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Um, so this is a group that's obviously really interested in Iowa. Curious both what, how you're processing the cuts at the federal level for things like cancer research, and also are you like what you're seeing or experiencing and able to share any, I think we'll all
Uh,
take words of
yeah,
wisdom if you have them.
okay, well, for sure. So, there. So I want to just before I jump in, I want to say something. So when it was asked about cancer, is it just because we're an older state? And it's age adjusted, these incident rates are. So we're basically saying we've got cancer and it's across the board in terms of age. One of the things I did in this last year was I ran against Pat Grassley for the Iowa House. And I made him work for it. But during all my door knocking I did, I started talking a lot about cancer, and sometimes they would bring it up. And what I heard were stories about a lot of people who were young that are getting cancer. And we're talking 30, 25, 40, colorectal cancer, a lot of oral cancers. It was a problem. And to the point where I think I was getting depressed at the end of the door knocking just from all of the cancers. So I can tell you that it's not just statistics, it's real stories. And it's motivated me to continue to fight hard, but also just wanted to relate that story that, because we're getting on kind of a personal thing here. And the other thing is this funding pullback that they're doing, it's so it's bad because what they're doing with like NIH is they're looking at lowering indirect costs, which if you take a look at, if I get a grant from the NIH, a good chunk of the money has to go to my institution, and the institution will say, hey, this is so we can, keep the lights on in your lab and the administrative costs and the overhead. But really it allows the university to function, and then for my lab to get support from them. So whether or not as a researcher, I want to, I think it's my right to always say the indirect cost line is too high. They want to knock it back to the point where we're going to lose 50 some $1 million in federal money to the region schools here as it relates to basically supporting cancer. Now, what that means too is programs start getting cut. And as a professor, I've got students that want to go to grad school. I've got students that want to do summer research programs. Those are getting shut down, or they're getting, there's a lot of uncertainty. And so that just overall is putting a huge in terms of the future of cancer research, because there are people who are looking at this going, I don't know if I want to go into that field. I don't know if I want to go get a doctorate. I'm having heart-to-heart conversations with really smart people who have gotten into graduate school at some amazing places, and they're like, I don't know if I still want to do this. So we're looking at a real moral crisis as it relates to what we're doing and not funding research like we should. So I'm scared, to be honest with you. And that's not a word I want to use lightly. But we've got to do some work here. And I would like to say, as far as the state of Iowa is concerned, $1 million is one of those, important things to hear. I'm glad she mentioned it, but it's a drop in the bucket and what we're going to have to spend to figure out all of the things that are causing us to be sick. So I'm hoping that some of whether it's Senate File 63 or House, all these things that could come through, I hope that includes more appropriation to cancer research. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And Senate File 63 is one I didn't put in the chat, but I can do that. I am not an expert by any means, but it sure looks to me like most of the research bills won't survive the funnel. That is March 7th. I don't know if you have a similar take or feel
That's
differently.
that's exactly what I've heard as well.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah,
unfortunate, and I think that's one of the reasons why I'm sitting here tonight, just upset, because you can say $1 million at your state of Iowa address, but you should need to follow through and support the legislation and the appropriations that are going to allow us to actually do the work that you say.
mm,
That's the hard take, and I know I might be um speaking through frustration, but it's also a deep awareness of the amount of effort that we've got in front of us. And
mm,
as you said, Kelly, what we're seeing right now is a reflection of what happened a decade ago. Even if we figure out, oh my gosh, we can't put this chemical in our environment, and we remove it, we're still going to have to ride out this way of high rates for a very long time until we adjust back.
yeah,
And that puts a real firm now, with alacrity, now we need to start working.
yeah. Well said. Really well said. So I have instructions to pass it back to Mary at 7:55, and I know we're already past, but Sean, do you have like any closing thoughts for like 30 seconds before I do that?
Well, I want to end with like a little bit more upbeat than I have been. But human history is just full of mistakes. Lead paint, asbestos, radium girls. We will continue to screw up, I think. But we have a lot more knowledge and skill at monitoring and removing carcinogens from our lives. So I think we all need to take heart and really focus on funding basic science, epidemiology, and getting to the answers that I know we can. And so as scared as I am also optimistic, because I've worked with the scientists that are in a position to do some great things for Iowa. And Kelly, you're bringing in some outside experts with your group, and hopefully we can work with this 99 counties and just everything that we can possibly do. And with that in mind, we could be looking at this 10 years from now. I'm hoping future us 10 years from now looks back at present us and thanks us for being motivated to make that difference. And so let's get after it.
What a beautiful way to end. Yeah, cheers to future us. Cheers to us right now too, but cheers to future us too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thank you. That's so well said. I did put a link in the chat for the 99 Counties project. The registry is taking county-specific cancer information reports to every single county in the state, and so you can go to that site and see if yours is coming up. They're open to the public. They're usually virtual or at least a hybrid option. Send me an email if you have more questions about that too. Love to have community participation. Sean, thank you again. And Mary, I think I will pass it back to you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Sean and Austin and Kelly. This was just been a tremendous piece of information that you shared tonight. Thank you very, very much. I'm just going to give you a brief highlight of an upcoming training that the Women's Caucus is going to do. We are planning a Saturday, March 22nd in Charles City. For women of the 2nd and 4th Congressional District, or anyone else that wants to attend. It's open. What I'd like to say is that it is for what we call the odd year elections. It's for people that are wanting to run for school board or running for city council. This will be a time for you to come and receive some really excellent help in how to get on the ballot, how to fundraise, how to speak to your constituents, how to talk about what you want the future to be. So it's going to be a great opportunity, and we'll hope that you register. The link that I put in the chat will help you get to the site so that you can register. So we'd love to have you come. And now I'll switch back to Kathy.
Don't have much to wrap up. Once again, thank you for these guests tonight. This was terrific. It was a really great conversation. For those of you that didn't have time to copy out all those things in the chat room. If you don't know, you can save the chat room. There should be, it's going to be different on everybody's computer. 3 little dots. It happens to be at the top of the chat room on mine, and you click it and it says save chat. I will include all of these links that were in the chat room tonight in the email that I send out tomorrow with the link to the recording. That'll help you and you won't have to write all this stuff down. Once again, thanks to you guys. I've had a couple questions lately about, are we Heart of Iowa? I can't speak to Mary, but I'm sure she'd go for it if we could figure it out. If we Heart of Iowa would consider doing a live event somewhere. The hard thing about it, of course, is that we get people in from all over the state. Where do you do it? But I don't think it's a bad idea. Somebody mentioned it in the chat room tonight, actually doing one that's particularly geared toward healthcare. So we'll continue to think about that and keep your ideas coming to us. Our next event will be the first Wednesday in April, Heart of Iowa, which I think is April 2nd. Don't have the topic picked out yet because there's so many to pick from. Hang in there. Write your reps, do all that stuff. We all got to do it, and it helps. So please do that, and thank you for being here tonight.